Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to day 2 of my Halloween movie review series. And today I'm going to be reviewing, I actually have the DVD right here, um, Friday the 13th, Part 2. So, pretty much the rest of the Friday the 13th franchise I have on DVD. The only one I don't actually have is the first one, which is weird that I don't have the first one. I just never got around to getting it, so I have to definitely do that someday. But I have all the other ones on DVD, so Um, yeah, I don't really know if people really even buy DVDs anymore because of how big Netflix and stuff like that is. So yeah, but yeah, so I'm gonna start this review. I've decided that just thinking now, before I actually start talking about the story, I'm gonna read the back of the movie, and that way it can kind of give you an idea of what this movie's about before I actually review it. So it says. Just when you thought it was safe to go back to camp, here's even more heart-pounding terror. 5 years after the horrible bloodbath at Camp Crystal Lake, it, all that remains is the legend of Jason Voorhees and his demented mother who had murdered 7 camp counselors. At a nearby summer camp, the new counselors are unconcerned about the warnings to stay away from the infamous site. Carefree, the young people roam the area, not sensing the ominous lurking presence. One by one, they are attacked and brutally slaughtered. Suspense and screams um, bound in this compelling thriller. And that pretty much just kind of says it all right there. So let's talk about this movie. So yes, they did make another one. This was the first appearance of Jason Voorhees. I know technically he was seen at the end of the last film when he pulled Annie into the water, but this was like the first um, time Jason was actually featured um, in the film when as the killer. And a lot of people probably are mistaken about how Jason Voorhees instantly um, came in and he was like an instant badass with his hockey mask or everything. But I bet a lot of people that watch that movie, once they watch this movie, will completely change their minds. But let's talk about this movie. So yeah, obviously this came off of the success of the first Friday the 13th. Um, and it was so successful. Um, Paramount Pictures wanted to make a new one, but obviously, you know, they couldn't just make a new one. They had to get the worldwide distribution rights, and it's kind of ironic. I was reading on Wikipedia stuff about it, and it's ironic in the fact that um, yeah, it's kind of ironic with the fact that um, originally this almost wasn't to be. The whole Friday the 13th franchise um, almost didn't happen because um, originally um, Frank Mancuso, I don't know if that's how you say your name, wanted to make this like um, a different type of story each time. He wanted to make this like a different type of series where it wouldn't be the same story every single time. And it is kind of interesting to think about that because think about um what how different um the Friday the 13th series would be today if they made it its own series. Maybe it would be more successful, but it might not be as successful as it is because maybe it could the Friday the 13th series would have absolutely tanked. Um, but you know who turned it down? One of the people um, one of the owners of the Esquire Theater, um, and um, Stephen Man. You know, 3 people turned this down who produced the original film. Um, Paul, Phil Scuddery, Steve Minasian, and Bob um, Balsamian. Um, they wanted to have the sequel be about Jason Voorhees. Because it made sense after the way the first film ended, and they kind of wanted to get into the backbone of Jason Voorhees being the killer. And um, Steve Miner, who was the associate producer of the first one, he believed in the idea, so he wanted to go with it. But who wasn't a fan of it? Um, the person who directed and produced the first, well, I don't remember if he produced it, but the person who directed the first one was um, Stephen S. Cunningham. He didn't want, um, he didn't like the idea of Jason being the killer, so he backed out of the movie, and he still has mixed feelings about the entire Friday the 13th enterprise. And who took over to direct it was none other than Steve Miner. However, it's not Sean S. Cunningham. It's actually Sean S. Cunningham, not Steve S. Cunningham. Sean S. Cunningham um, did direct some of the additional scenes. I'm assuming because it shows some of the past scenes from the first movie. I'm assuming those are the additional scenes that he directed. So pretty much that's kind of how this movie was developed, and how the casting was done was um, Adrienne Kin was brought back, um, but to play Alice Hody. However, she really wasn't in this movie that much. Um, the reason that her agent has said is because she asked for a higher salary, and the studio couldn't afford it, so that's why she wasn't the main character in it. Um, so there you go. And then Amy Steele was brought in to play Ginny, and I was actually reading, and she actually didn't take her audition as seriously because she didn't think that Friday the 13th was going to become this great success. But she still took it pretty seriously and still got the role, but didn't take it as seriously. And this was Warren Gillette's first appearance as Jason, um, who was unmasked at the end of the movie. And Stephen Daskowitz played Jason's stuntman, who's also known as Stephen Dash. But he was pretty much Jason the whole movie because he played him in his burlap sack. But I'm not going to talk about any more of that. Um, this movie, though, I should mention was shot on October 3rd and finished in 1980, and it was shot. It occurred at New Princeton in Kent, Connecticut. And the special effects originally team Tom Savani was asked to be brought back, but he declined it because he had another project to work on called Midnight that came out in 1982. Maybe I'll review that someday. So then he was replaced by Stan Winston, but he had some scheduling issues, so he couldn't do it. And then the makeup person was finally made as Carl Fullerton, and he did the makeup and worked decided what Jason would look like um, throughout the first film. So I've kind of gone through all that stuff. Now let me kind of go through who directed and everything. I just kind of wanted to give this movie a little bit of back history. So this movie was directed by, like I said before, Steve Miner, and the additional scenes were directed by Sean S. Cunningham. It was produced by Steve Miner as well. It was written by Ron Kurz and Phil Scuderi. I might be saying these names wrong, but whatever. And this is based on the work of Victor Miller. And the music was done by Harry Man Friendly, and the cinematography was done by Peter Stein, and the this was edited by Susan E. Cunningham, and the production company was Georgetown Productions, and this was distributed, like I said before, by Paramount Pictures. And this movie came out on April 30th, 1981, and this had a budget of $1.25 million. I don't know if that's just based off today's money or if it was based off money back in the 80s, because I know um, that it's different back then than it is today. But let's talk about the actual movie itself. The movie jumps into 2 months after the first film, and we see Jason, and obviously he's watching outside of Alice Hardy's house. Um, and he yeah he and Alice Hardy's having a nightmare about the events that happened in the first film. I think they put this in there just so that way people would remember the events that happened in the first film, because some people probably didn't. Or they just kind of wanted to, give her that backstory. And she wakes up after the nightmares, and we find out that she pretty much lives by herself, just out in the alone in the cabin. And her mother calls, and they get into an argument because essentially her mother doesn't think this is the way that she wants to get her life on track, but Alice believes that this is the way that she can get um, her life on track. Um, and then she hangs up, um, and Alice takes a shower. And I kind of like when she got changed. The cameraman didn't go exactly in the room with her, but kind of was like watching through the corner, and didn't show her actually getting naked and stuff like that. Um, and then she overhears some sort of noise happen. So this scares Alice, and she locks the door. And then she sees that the window's open, and she grabs an ice pick and goes to see what it is. And who jumps in? None other than a cat. And it didn't look like this cat though originally was jumped in. It looks like someone threw this cat in there, because that cat did not look like it jumped in that window. And this makes out makes Alice feel relieved, and she goes to get the cat some food. She opens the fridge, and she sees the severed head of Pamela Voorhees, and this freaks her out. And then Jason, who we don't actually see, it's kind of like the same thing as the first film when his mother would do the killing. We wouldn't actually see her, but we would see um, her hands or boots. Um, the difference between in this one though is we do know it's Jason that's doing the killing, so it doesn't necessarily completely not show Jason, but like in the first one where it was a complete mystery who was doing the killings, so we actually do know who's doing the killings. But Jason stabs Alice right through the head with an ice pick and kills her, and then that was kind of like the opening of the first movie. I liked the opening to the first of I liked the opening scene of this movie. I thought it did a really good job of setting the tone for what the movie was going to be about. Um, but what also kind of sucks is if you don't know any of this backstage stuff, this off-screen stuff with Alice, you're kind of left thinking, well, what's the point of watching the rest of the film? So, but I still like the way it was done. Um, and then it cuts to 5 years later, um, and a group of kids are gonna go be counselors um, at a camp, and I think we were supposed to be left to believe that it was gonna be Camp Crystal Lake, but I'll get back more onto that. And we meet the first um, group of kids. It ends up being Sandra and I want to make sure Jeff, and they pull up to a payphone and try to call their friend to get the address to the place. And Crazy Ralph was there watching them. And I did like how Crazy Ralph, while we were on the conversation, comes up and tries to warn him not to. He says that he warned the others not to go to Camp Crystal Lake, and they didn't believe me. And he tells um, Sandra and Jeff to stay away from Camp Blood because it has a death curse. And then he rides his bike nonchalantly. And this creeps them out, but they kind of continue going about their business. Um, and as off kind of in the background, we see that somebody is towing um Jeff and Sandra's truck. And I like this scene actually. I thought it was a funny scene when he notices this. Um, he runs to the guy that's towing his truck, and I like this scene where he's yelling out the window saying that um, this is my fucking truck, and he chases the guy down, but we find out that it was a prank. It was a prank by one of their friends, Jeff, and actually not Jeff. Sorry, that I think it was um, Terry, but I might be mistaken. I want to make sure that I'm not wrong. No, Ted. It was Ted that pulled this prank. And they go to the camp, and they end up stopping the truck, and they see that Camp Crystal Lake, the signs destroyed, and we think that's the camp that they're going to. And Ted says that that's not the camp they're going to. We'll find out that they're going at the next camp over, which they never said the name of the camp. And he says that there's crazy stories about Camp Crystal Lake that I don't want to tell you about right now because because you'll lose your lunch. Um, and then we meet the entire camp counselors. I'm just gonna read them off. Um, right here. Um, we meet. So yeah, we already met Sandro and Jeff, and we meet Scott, Terry, Mark, who's in a wheelchair, Vicky, Ted. We already met Ted, and Paul. And Paul is the guy that runs the camp. Um, he's the host counselor because this actually is a counselor's training camp. I should have said that. Um, and everybody arrives at the camp. They do in the funny scene where um, Scott ends up slingshotting a rock right to Terry's ass, and it was funny because he was trying to be very perverted, and this kind of becomes a common theme throughout the film. And Terry has a dog named Muffins, which is a Shih Tzu, and it was actually, um, it was actually a really weird name to name a dog Muffins, but I'm not gonna really get that mad about it because it's not really worth it. But I just wouldn't. If I was gonna have a dog, I wouldn't name it Muffins. Um, but Paul's talking to the camp counselors, and he's telling them all the stuff they're gonna do at camp to be a counselor, and they think it's easy to be training to be a counselor, but it really isn't. And then one of his counselors gets late. We find out it's her assistant, Ginny Field, and Paul goes and talks to her privately, and he isn't happy that she's late, but um, she apologizes and says, "Hey, it's only like the first day, and nobody's here yet." And they end up kissing. We find out they're an item, and Ginny's trying to move her car, but um, her car is dead. Um, and um, Paul comes and helps her moves it, and we find out that she's a child psychology major, and this kind of becomes important later on in the movie. So they end up being able to move her car, and later on in the night, they tell a story about Jason Voorhees, how the night that his mother died, he ended up seeing it all happen after he pulled the um, Annie, who they don't say because they don't know her name, but Annie into the water. They talk about how she mysteriously went missing and how Jason seeing his mother get killed messed him up for life. And he would live off the land and grow into adulthood, and he would live off um, squirrel and any type of animal that he could find. And he says he's waiting for other campers and counselors like themselves um, to to um, camp out here, and he's and to kill them, so that way he can kill them himself. And um, who comes out of the woods wearing a mask and holding a spear? None other than Ted. And they think we're supposed to think that this is a well, they think it's a real thing. We know it's not, um, the, um, but yeah, they think this is a real. This is actually Jason, but it's not. It's just Ted in a mask. He ends up taking the mask off. But Paul then gets serious and said, "That's the only thing I'm going to mention of this tonight. Um, no more of it. Um, um, and he tells them that Camp Crystal Lake's off limits. Um, and then what happens is the rest of the camp are just having fun for the night, and Paul ends up scaring Ginny again, and they kind of have like a little love session and stuff like that. And we see that Crazy Ralph is watching them um, from the distance, and Jason pops up behind him and garrotes him. I don't know if that's how you say the word, but he pretty much just took like this um, tool that's like a rope and hunt him back to the tree. But if I said the word right, then I don't need to explain it. But I thought this was a really cool kill. But it was kind of sad to see Crazy Ralph die. And it's kind of funny that he's been giving all these people warnings not to go to the camp, and then he goes to the camp himself and gets killed. Um, but it was kind of sad to see Crazy Ralph die, because I think he was an awesome character for the series. And he was only in like 2 episodes. No, I'm sorry, 2 movies too. Um, and then the next day, the counselors are doing a training session, and um, I just want to make sure I get the name right. Jeff and Sandra want to go and see Camp Crystal Lake. Sandra wants Jeff to take her to take her to go with her. She wants to see what it looks like herself, and um, they sneak away to Camp Crystal Lake while everybody's swimming in the water, and um, they end up going across the Crystal Lake, and they make it. And then they see the severed carcass, because I forgot to mention that Muffins came across Jason, and when we see the severed carcass, um, this pretty much shows us that Jason murdered Muffins, which was very sad. Um, and then Deputy Winslow pops up and is upset that they're there, and he tells Paul about it, and he wants Paul to kind of move um, the Council of Training Camp away from um, Camp Crystal Lake, like far away from it, because of all the bad stuff that's happened there. And then Paul refuses, and Officer Winslow says that next time somebody does that, he's going to end up arresting them. And then he says um, that he likes what Paul has running here, and also he says that when Paul gives Jeff and Sandra a punishment, he gives them like no dessert tonight, and um, Deputy Winslow is just pissed that that's all he gave him as a punishment. And then the next scene, Deputy Winslow is driving away from the camp, and he sees Jason running over to the Camp Crystal Lake, and he doesn't know that it's Jason. He just thinks it's probably some teenager going to Camp Crystal Lake, and he's gonna go run and stop him since it's condemned. And um and I know people probably don't know this. Well, probably most people know this. Jason, as we know it, in the horror movies, doesn't normally run. This movie he ran, and this actually makes sense because later on in the movie, later on in the franchise, Jason kind of starts to not really be human. He's kind of like, um, a demon, kind of like a zombie, um, the undead. But in this movie, he hasn't really died yet, and he's more human in this movie. Um, and we find out that Jason has a burlap sack over his head, and this is definitely was the early stages of Jason because a lot of people probably don't know, but Jason doesn't wear his hockey mask in this movie. He doesn't get it until the next film, um, which I actually like. Um, well, I mean, because they were still developing Jason. I don't really think they knew that Jason was gonna end up, being this big horror iconic figure that he was now. But Jason doesn't have his hockey mask. He doesn't have his signature um, machete that he usually has when he kills people, and he doesn't have like his normal clothes on when he kills people. And he's very humanized in this movie. But I didn't really mind that much because, like I said, this was the first movie with Jason, and it was still done very well. But Officer Deputy, who looked like he was out of shape because he was just tired, just running across um, the the woods. Um, I feel like if he was actually going to be a cop in real life, he wouldn't be a cop. Um, but then he goes into the cabin and tries to find Jason, and he goes in and is horrified about what he sees, and Jason pops up behind him and hits him in the back of the head with a hammer claw and kills Officer um, Officer Winslow. And then back at the camp, um, Paul talks to all the campers and says that tonight's the last night of freedom because then the counseling tutoring sessions really starts to begin, and they allow people the ability to pick. They allow some people to come out and to town with them and party and stuff like that, but then we find out that only like that they only have two cars, so some people have to stay behind, and Jeff and Sandra have to stay behind because because this is their punishment for sneaking off to Camp Crystal Lake. So Ginny and Ted are volunteer, and Mark wants to stay back because he felt like it would be a party pooper if he ended up getting drunk since he's in a wheelchair. Um, and I actually thought this was kind of a dick move for people to do this because they just put everybody just pretty much leaves, um, and we know pretty much the people that stay are gonna get murdered. Um, so I thought this was kind of an absolute dick move. Now, obviously, they couldn't have known, but it really makes you think about it. Because if they had stayed, they probably still would have all died anyways, maybe, but not. But I just still thought it was a dick move. But this kind of separates the movie into two separate storylines, so I'm just going to talk about one of them. What ends up happening is back at the bar, Ginny, since she's a child psychologist, is kind of talking about the Jason Voorhees urban legend and wonders what Jason Voorhees is thinking, not drowning in the lake and not really having a mother. Um, she wonders if he's um, since he hasn't had a mother and he never went to school, if he really knows right from wrong, if he really understands what the concept of death is, and if he's a little kid that's trapped in an adult-sized body. And I kind of like this a lot. She was kind of try to figure out the story of Jason. It kind of makes us think about that type of stuff as well. And Paul doesn't believe the story. He just believes that it's just an urban legend. Um, and later on, they leave the bar. That scene really isn't important, but that scene where Ginny's trying to figure out the character of Jason, I thought was pretty important. Um, and then back at the camp, um, everybody's kind of doing their own thing. Mark is beating people in arm wrestling contests, and he was on the verge of beating Jeff, but um, Sandra wants to have sex with him, so he thought that was more important, so he goes and tends to that, which I guess no one could really blame him. Um, Scott, actually Terry is worried about the loss of a dog, and when when Malk and Sandra came back and wondered if they should tell, actually I'm sorry, not Malk, Jeff and Sandra come back. Um, they wonder if they should tell, um, you know, they wondered if they should tell um, Terry about the murder of a dog, but they decided to keep it to themselves. But Terry goes for a swim and to look for a dog, and she goes skinny dipping. She was probably the skinniest girl I had ever seen in my life. Um, but she goes skinny dipping, and Scott comes over and steals her clothes. We know Jason's watching from a distance, and um, when Terry comes out of the water, um, Scott reveals that he has her clothes, so he gives her her clothes back, but doesn't give back her shirt. So Terry chases him, and somebody had a rope set up on the bottom, and Malk steps on it, and he ends up hanging upside down from a tree. And um, Scott wants Terry to cut him down, and Terry says that she will if he stops if he starts being a pervert, and he agrees. And she goes to get a knife to cut him down, but before she comes back, and while she's gone, Jason pops up and cuts his throat while he's upside down. And when Terry comes back, she sees that Scott's been killed, and she starts screaming, and she ends up dying off camera, and we don't exactly see what happens to her. But we know Jason killed her because she screamed, and we never heard from again. Um, and then um, Mark and Vicky are getting along with each other. Um, and I actually kind of like this dynamic in this movie, just because normally in horror movies like this, people just kind of have sex just for the hell of it. But Mark and Vicky um, actually started having a nicely built relationship, even though we know that the goal is that she's gonna have sex with him. At least they established the characters before they had sex, so I kind of like that. Um, which I know is weird to say that, but I'm just saying. But um, they pretty much want to sleep together. We do find out that Margot is in a wheelchair because he was in a motorcycle accident, and the doctor says he's never gonna walk again. But he says that's what the doctors say, but that's not what I say. So he pretty much wants to prove everybody wrong. And while she's gone, he goes outside and is trying to find her, and then Jason ends up you know um killing Mulk. I think he killed him with um I he killed him with a machete, and he slammed it right into his face, and he ended up falling down the stairs. Um which I thought was a nice scene. Um and as Vicky was getting ready, actually no, that's not what happens next. And then what happens next is Jason goes into the house where Jeff and Sandra are in, and he takes the spear that Ted had earlier in the film when he was disguised as Jason, and while Jeff and Sandra are having sex, he comes into the room and stabs them right through the bed with a spear. Um, so you can say that Jeff and Sandra died in each other's arms because Jason killed them. I like that scene a lot. And then Vicky comes in and is trying to find Mark, and she goes upstairs to where the room that Jeff and Sandra were sleeping in, and she turns on the light and goes to and when she pulls the covers down, they reveal that it's Jason. This is the first time we've actually seen Jason full fledged, full body. We've actually seen his face and stuff, and she cuts Vicky's leg and kills her. And when Paul and Ginny come back, um, Jason's dragging her dead body um, on the ground, and Paul and Ginny start to get worried because the place is a mess. There's no power, and they start to get suspicious. And when they go upstairs, Jenny pulls down the covers of the bed that Jeff and Sandra were sleeping in, and sees that it's covered with blood. And they start to get freaked out, realize that there's something wrong, and um, you know, um, what ends up happening is Ginny has like a bad feeling that somebody's in the room, and then she actually sees that Jason's in the room, and he tackles Paul to the ground, and they get into a tussle, and we don't really see anything else that happens, and Ginny wonders, is continuously asking if Paul's okay, but then she sees Jason, so then she closes the door in the bathroom and holds the handle so that way Jason can't get in. But then she looks out the window to see if he's there, and Jason tries to come through the window, but Ginny escapes again. And then they have like a nice chase scene that I thought was really cool. I really liked the chase scene that they had. Um, it, um, you know, Ginny's running all over the place, and Jason's trying to kill her. He ends up grabbing a pitchfork, and Jaylee runs outside and tries to get a car started, but Jason follows her out there, and he cuts a hole through the roof because back then cars had um, the convertible, and I liked it when he had like his hand trying to reach in, and she kicks the passenger seat door right into Jason, and then she runs away and hides from him, and um, then Jason, she hides in a bush, and Jason finds her again, and she gets a quick shot in on Jason, and she runs away from him. And I did like the scene where it cut back and forth and faded away as she was running away, and how it was really dark. So I like that scene a lot. And then she goes into one of the other cabins and hides underneath the bed, and Jason comes in and is trying to find her. And then rats run underneath the bed, and Ginny ends up pissing her pants, so it gives her away. And when she comes out from under the bed, Jason's on top of not the bed, but like the nightstand, and the nightstand falls over, and Jason, so it causes Jason to miss her when he's trying to use the pitchfork, and then the pitchfork break. Jeannie who earlier was using a chainsaw in the movie to cut something, and she grabs the chainsaw again, and she goes after Jason with it, and this ends up breaking his pitchfork, and um, the Jason ends up falling over, and Ginny grabs a chair and breaks it across his back, and Jason gets knocked out from this for a while, and then she runs away from Jason some more. Um, she runs all the way to Camp Crystal Lake in his shrine. Well, in his book, I just gave away that, but in his room, and um hides from him there. Jason finds her, and she blockades the door, and then she sees that Jason has like a shrine made to his mother, and he has her clothes, and she puts her shirt on, and Jason breaks into the room with a pickaxe, and I really like this scene a lot. And Ginny pretends to be um, Pamela Voorhees, and she's talking to him, trying to get him on her side in a way, and she talks to him saying that you've made mommy very proud. The deed is done, and Jason's very perplexed about this. I think he's very confused, and Jason still acts like he's gonna kill her. And what I liked about this is when she would talk at once, sometimes it would show Pamela Voorhees herself, and um and she would say whatever she was saying, since it was kind of like what Jason was seeing, and um she has Jason kneel down so she can give him a gift, and she's about to cut his head off with the machete. But then Jason sees that his mom's severed head is still on the, I guess I would call it the table. So he realizes he's been tricked, so he cuts Ginny's leg, and he's about to kill Ginny. But then Paul runs in and attacks Jason again. The whole building starts to crumble, and then Ginny hits Jason in the back of the head with the machete, but he doesn't. She doesn't cut his head off. And then they go back to their camp, and then they overhear some commotion going on outside, thinking that it's Jason, and they grab the pieces of the pitchfork. Paul grabs the handle, and Ginny has the actual sharp part of the pitchfork. And Paul opens the door, and we find out that it's Muffins. We find out that Muffins wasn't murdered, which I thought was a nice twist. And then the movie, I think, is going to end on a good note, and then Jason jumps through the window and attacks Ginny, but we don't see anything else that happens. All we see is that the next day, Ginny's being taken to the hospital. So I thought this was very confusing because I didn't really understand what happened. And we don't see Paul, too, so I don't know if Paul was killed by Jason or what. And then, and we even find out that Paul's character wasn't supposed to be there to begin with, so that's why we didn't see anything that happened with Paul. And then, the movie ends with showing Jason, Pamela Voorhees' severed head. So that was the end of the movie. Now it's time for my letter grade. I actually thought this was a good movie. I thought it was a nice sequel to the first one, but I don't think it was quite better than the sequel. But I still like the movie. I still like that it's the introduction to Jason. I think what hurts this movie is that this is pretty much the same movie, except it's Jason doing the killing instead of his mother. But I still think it's a good movie. It was a nice introduction to Jason, and I thought it had a nice story in it. I did like that this movie had some better developed characters though than the last movie did. This movie actually gave us like background to Mark's character, a background to Ginny's character, Paul's character. Even a little bit into Scott's character, so I thought the characters were a little bit more developed in this movie. But this is still a good follow-up to the first one. I thought this was good. But the first one I just thought was a little bit better. But that's just me. But I did think it was a good sequel, and it was nice to see. It is kind of nice to watch this back now, seeing Jason in like his early stages in movie history. So let's talk about now, though. There is some things I do want to address. Is that in real life, Steve Daskowitz ended up having to be taken to the emergency room doing filming when his hand got cut from the machete when they were shooting that scene when he came in with the pickaxe, and they got the timing wrong, so he ended up having to. It ended up hitting his finger, so they had to put 13 stitches on his middle finger. So they had to reshoot the scene again, and the reaction that Adrian Kin had to the ice pick prop wasn't staged. It was actually a legitimate reaction because she was because she was concerned that it was going to really hurt her. They did something to adjust Jason and his burlap sack, and they ended up having to redo the scene where Jason jumped through the window 3 times, and Amy Steele got worried every time. And then obviously, like I mentioned, John Flurry's character wasn't supposed to be in this movie, so I just talked about that. But yeah, this movie did, you know, and then they obviously too couldn't get this movie in a rated R, so they had to get it into an X-rated movie, and they had to cut some things out because of that. And the original ending, there's a deleted scene in this movie that I don't know if I have it, but that you don't see. And the original ending was supposed to have Mrs. Voorhees' head smiling at the camera, but Miner wanting to scrap that because he thought it was stupid, which I agree with him. That would be stupid. So I actually glad that he smartened up on that one. But let's talk about how this movie did in theaters. This movie, like I mentioned, was released on April 30th, 1981, and in opening weekend it made 6,429,784 dollars, and it was played on 1,350 screens, and overall it ended up earning 21,722,776 and it ended up being the 35th highest grossest film of 1981. Um, and it faced strong competition in the early year, um, such as Omen, Omen 3, The Final Conflict, The Evil Dead, The Howling, um, Scanners, Wolfen, Deadly Blessing, The Funhouse, Halloween 2, My Bloody Valentine, The Power, Happy Birthday to Me, Graduation Day, The Burning, The Fan, and The Hand, which I actually haven't have The Hand. I just never watched it. I think it finished after Halloween 2, though. I'm gonna check on that right now. Um, I want to check on that real quick. So, yeah, it bet Halloween 2 bested, and I'm talking about the original Halloween 2 bested Friday the 13th Part 2, but it still did really well in theaters. And obviously, this was kind of like the original, where not as many people gave it a positive review originally, but nowadays they probably would give it a positive review. They kind of thought the same thing I did, that it was pretty much the same movie, except you know, it wasn't. It was a little bit different, but the fans gave this movie a good rating. Um, but yeah, like I said, if critics probably rate it today, they would give it a better rating. But the fans gave this movie pretty high praise. It got about the same as it did to the original. Um, and this was all out of 10. This was on IMDb. Um, the highest was a 10, and the lowest I saw was a 5. So a lot of people liked this movie. I got overall um, I believe it was a 6.1. Yep, 6.1 out of 10. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to go over the cast now. Now, just because, as I talked about in my last few movie reviews, I'm just going to read the cast and who started. I'm not going to mention what other works they've done because I found that gets to be really tedious, so I'm not going to do that. I do want to mention, I forgot to mention one thing. When Jason jumped in unmasked, you could see that his face was kind of completely messed up, and I kind of liked the way that the makeup was done for that, so I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Um, but the cast, I already mentioned some of them. But Amy Steele played Ginny Field. John Furry played Paul Holt. Steve Wiz played Jason Voorhees, and Warrington Gillette played Jason Voorhees unmasked. Um, Stu Chirano played Ted. Lauren Marie Taylor played Vicky. Marta Koba played Sandra Dyer. Tom McBride played Mulk. Bill Randolph played Jeff. Kristen Baker played Terry. Russell Todd played Scott. Walt Gorney played Crazy Ralph. He returned for this movie. Adrian Kin played Allison Hardy again. Betsy Palmer returned to play Pamela Voorhees. Jack March played Deputy Winslow. And Cliff Cudney played Max. And I don't think I mentioned, but Max was the guy that towed Jeff's truck. And that's pretty much the entire my review of this entire movie. Like I said again, good sequel. I'm giving it a B minus. And that's pretty much the end of this review, though. Please make sure you guys like, comment, and share this video so people will watch it. Make sure you guys subscribe to this channel for more content and click on the bell so that way every time you upload a video, you guys will get the updates for it. or you guys will get the notification that I uploaded a video. And make sure you guys do the same thing for my CL Brothers YouTube channel. That's pretty much it, guys. Talk to you later.